I've done thousands of advances. I've done thousands of counter-sniper operations with our teams in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. The amount of negligence, the amount of mistakes that was made here, I have a very difficult time not leaning myself towards this was intentional as opposed to fecklessness. But one of the things
freaking out.
Who's running the special operations committees before, one of the people who's actually done this is that you look at all potential analysis, right?
Donald Trump and his team have said, do not.
No, I agree.
Dial it back. Do not blame this on Joe Biden.
Oh, well, actually, I didn't say Joe Biden. To be complete.
Oh!
These are kind of the dimensions that you look at as an average. You're talking about a 1.6-inch grouping for multiple shots on a basic rifle. We're blessed. I do believe in divine intervention, so I am a person of faith.
Wild. Should anybody be charged with a crime as a result of the Trump assassination attempt? Of course, the person who did the shooting is dead, so we can't charge him with a crime, but was there anybody else involved? Was this something where maybe the Secret Service or the people who were responsible for the security on the day of the shooting, whether they should be held responsible or whether they were complicit or maybe even intentional in this entire catastrophe? And so we're going to talk about that and hear from Representative Corey Mills, who is a U.S. sniper, and hear what he says about all of this. But these are the different levels that we're going to parse through here today and see which category you think maybe the Secret Service or maybe the people responsible for security on this day would fall into. We're going to talk about intentional conduct, reckless conduct, criminal negligence, no negligence, and various different components to how all this works, legally speaking. But before we get into this, I wanted to share this interesting animation that was recreated from the interwebs. You can see on this post, which was shared over from Jedi Hill, which is an individual building the new Atlantis, which sounds awesome. He posted this. He says, "This is we the people solving the crime so it can't end up buried like the JFK assassination. We must remove the traitors from within the federal government." But this is the recreation, the AI rendering of what took place the day of the shooting. You can see they have what looks like a spider web framework over Trump's face, and then they recreate the backside of his head. Watch how close this was. It's actually surreal when you see it rendered this way. Right there, you can see that head pivot. Boom. Clipped his ear. And he just barely avoided a bullet in the brain. So it was an absolute miracle that that happened. But we ask ourselves, how did this get so close? How did the former president and the current leading presidential candidate for the Republicans get so close to having his head blown off? We ask ourselves, was this just an accident or was there something much greater at play here? And so I want to go through the different levels of criminal culpability that we often talk about in the law, right? And there's a lot of gray area in between each of these, but for general strokes, we're talking about the least serious, no criminal responsibility, nobody's in trouble at all. This was just a pure accident at the bottom, and we're talking about an intentional, directed assassination operation at the top. Let's talk about how we can parse through all these to see where maybe our Secret Service or our intelligence agencies fall. So down here at the bottom, we see, let's give the government the absolute benefit of the doubt, right? They say there's no negligence at all. This was something that was not foreseeable, right? We can't anticipate that something like this might happen. And so if that's the case, then nobody is responsible for the fact that it did happen. If you can't predict that it's coming, if you can't foresee this is called foreseeability in the law, then how can you possibly be responsible for something that nobody could even predict? So was that the case here? Obviously not, right? The Secret Service, the law enforcement agencies, they exist specifically to prevent this type of harm, to prevent Trump from being shot in the head. And they failed catastrophically. So the idea that this was just an accident, the analogy that I think we can come up with is nobody was really thinking that they were going to fly planes into buildings back on 9/11. Then they flew planes into buildings. Now we all think, well, are they going to fly planes into buildings again? Because it was not foreseeable at the time. Now it has become foreseeable. Shooting a presidential candidate in the head from a far off location, absolutely foreseeable. That is not something that was, whoa, my gosh, I can't believe they're on a rooftop over there, right? This has happened before already. We had Kennedy with his brains blown out, maybe by the CIA then. But the problem is they are supposed to be prepared for this. And so we can write this off categorically. It wasn't negligence or an absence of negligence. It wasn't an accident. There was a lot more culpability here behind what we saw. So then we go up to the next level. Then we talk about this concept called criminal negligence. And so it's a lot more serious because somebody did something wrong here. Could we charge somebody with a crime based on some sort of criminal negligence statutes? And again, we're talking about broad strokes because this is a national live stream that we do here. And we're not zooming in any particular area, but let's just talk about this in broad strokes. Criminal negligence. What if the police and the Secret Service, and I think this absolutely fits, should have been aware aware of the risk, as they should have, right? We don't want presidential candidates being shot, but they were not aware of the risk, and so they were negligent, right? The standard might be something like this. A reasonable officer or Secret Service agent would have known to secure this roof, and they failed to do so, right? They failed to act reasonably. So they should have known better, but they didn't take action, or they didn't know better. So they were just poorly trained. So this is kind of like an incompetence standard. So could we suspect that the Secret Service and these local law enforcement officials were also incompetent? They were negligent in the securing of the location. Sure, I think that also would fit, just by virtue of the fact that there's a dead person and Trump got shot, as did other people. So somebody was negligent because the bad thing happened, and somebody else who's a reasonable Secret Service agent would have secured the roof. That didn't happen. So that standard is at minimum, I think, hit. So we'll ask ourselves, who's going to be prosecuted as a result of this misconduct? Now, when we go beyond that, that's just incompetence. That's like nobody's really moving towards intentionally badly. So the next standard up, and I want to parse through this one from this other intentional category, but let's say that the Secret Service and the police, they knew that there was a risk. They say, okay, look, we probably should have somebody on that roof, but we are not going to put them on the roof because there's a slope on the roof. So they knew of the risk, but they actively disregarded that risk. Okay, that's a reckless thing to do. So we're going to disambiguate this between intentional and recklessness. So for example, now a shooter under the recklessness standard is somebody criminally liable for the misconduct here. A shooter could have taken position and then shot, and that risk was disregarded, right? But there was no actual knowledge of the shooter. So I know we're saying the same thing many times, but they know of a possibility that somebody could be shot or that there could be a shooter up there doing a shooting, but they didn't know of a specific threat, and they were reckless for not securing it. Now that also, I think, might apply here, right? They should have known that shooter could have gotten on that roof and it would have had a direct line of sight to the president. They would have done basic reconnaissance and determined that, and they disregarded that risk, even if they had no knowledge of a particular shooter on the scene at the time. And now we go up. Now this is more criminal culpability. They're actually more liable as we work our way up here. The next level would be that the Secret Service and the police actually allowed, by not taking action, right? So there's some volitional action here, a shooter that they knew about to take position and fire. So they're not directing the shooter, they're not coordinating the shooter, orchestrating anything, but they know of the shooter, and they're indirectly just moving resources around to clear the field. Just don't guard that location and something can happen. You see this a lot in the spy shows, the spy TV shows, right? They capture that guy's wife and kid, and like, you just open the gate, that's all you have to do. Oh no, I don't want to. We're gonna kill your wife and kid. Okay, I'll open the gate. They open the gate, the guy drives the bomb through, blows up the whole building. You know, that guy only did that little small thing. So is it a situation like that, right? Not knowing and coordinating the attack, but knowing that something was going to happen and not securing the location as a result of this. So that could be another intentional standard. And then we have the actual direct coordination and the authorization of the shooting, right? So this person now at the intentional direct level would want and coordinate that actual shooter. And then that could lead to maybe two shooters, false identity shooter, but there's an operation behind the scenes here. We could call that CIA, like we prognosticate with JFK. We have, and similarly, RFK. The shooter might be somebody who's an asset for whether a domestic intelligence agency or a foreign intelligence agency. And we ask ourselves, well, with CIA, that's crazy. Why would they be assassinating our own presidential candidates? Well, they've theoretically done it before. Ask RFK Jr. his take on it, and he'll tell you, probably the CIA. And we also saw in the last election, they signed in collusion with one another a 51 signed intelligence letter that was false. So they are not without interfering in our elections. So in this situation, right, somebody is actively opening a window. Somebody's guiding, opening a window, and coordinating the shoot. So these are different standards that we're playing around with. We're asking ourselves, what level of culpability did the Secret Service have? Did the local police have? Is there a broader intentional conspiracy at play that's being coordinated or conducted by somebody? Who knows? But somebody who's been thinking a lot about this is Representative Corey Mills. And he is on here with CNN talking about this specifically. And if you're not familiar with Corey Mills, he is a former U.S. Army sniper, and he's got a lot of background in private intelligence and security, where they will be contracted to go in and secure the perimeter for high value individuals.
You know, I look at all of these things and I look at different videos where an assailant will pull a firearm on a law enforcement officer, and the first thing they do is they immediately pull and draw and mitigate the threat and the risk. You know, I ask why the local law enforcement officer did not do so. The other thing is that when you set up an advanced team, I keep hearing this about the perimeter elements.
Yeah.
You know, the perimeter is actually established by your threats that are in the area. So if I don't have any threats outside of 100 yards, okay, fine, I can cordon off a certain area. But if I have a building 160 yards perfectly adjacent to the stage, that's an obvious threat, especially with an elevated position that has overwatch. Mm-hmm. That's a sniper's paradise. And you know, we talk about Eagle's Nest. You also have, which no one talks about, but the water tower.
So what I'm hearing from you is it's not...
Yeah, the water tower. Did you hear that? that. So put a pin in that because he's talking about the water tower. And when you look at the maps and you zoom out on this thing, and we're seeing more aerial photography, we're seeing more Google Earth renderings and some other high-priced renderings that show the trees and the blockage of the line of sight and all this stuff. We're asking ourselves, was this essentially a kill zone? Was this set up in a location where there could be multiple shooters and multiple people who have a direct line of sight, and were these rooftops opened intentionally? And you heard him talk about the very difficult, right? It's like a sniper's paradise to put him in there. So why would they do that? We asked the same questions with how they drove Kennedy through Dallas.
Failure on the ground for sure, but also a failure in advance.
I think it's a failure in advance. I think it's failure to have the counter snipers to be able to establish their range fin and their sketch maps.
We've also learned that local snipers were stationed inside that building.
I haven't heard that piece of it yet, but that doesn't necessarily make sense unless they were actually in a window which was back off, because a lot of times you'll get yourself in there. Sometimes you expose your rifle in a way to try and do a force protection or a show of force that actually stops things. Others are actually more tactical where they'll sit back a little bit, but a sniper for the law enforcement is only trained to shoot about 75 yards, unlike your counter sniper teams that are on so. But here's my problem. In having done this for so long, and they always say the adage of ignorance is bliss, and I think that's true. I've done thousands of advances. I've done thousands of counter sniper operations with our teams in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. The amount of negligence, the amount of mistakes that was made here, I have a very difficult time not leaning myself towards this was intentional as opposed to fecklessness.
But wait, tell me about that. I actually heard you say this right the day after, which I wanted to ask you about. What do you mean intentional? You mean an intentional failure on the part of...
No, I wouldn't say an intentional failure on the part of, but I gotta just, I sit here and I scratch my head. You don't want to be the conspiracist. You don't want to be the person.
I'm telling you, because that's what it's leaning toward.
No, I know, and that's the issue, is that you walk this fine balance of, you're not trying to be a conspiracist, but you look at it and you go, how could this have gone so...
But it's one thing if someone on the street says it. It's another, you, Core Mills, member of Congress, former sniper, saying it, it makes my eyebrows go up. When you say you're walking the line on this, intentional what?
It almost seems to me, and I think that an investigation is necessary at this point within Congress, not just the FBI, not just others. I look back at it and I'm thinking, for an individual, if you looked at the escalations and how they had tried to approach him, let's just say that it was like, okay, first we want to censor and silence you, then we want to indict and imprison you. Now we're attempting to kill you and take you off the stage.
Whoa. Let's slow down.
Please.
I'm hearing two things from you. I don't want to jump ahead of things, but I'm also hearing you jumping ahead of things.
Well, actually, I'm just looking at all the different possible capabilities. But one of the things
freaking
the person
out.
who's running the special operations committees before, one of the people who's actually done this is that you look at all potential analysis, right?
Donald Trump and his team have said, do not...
No, I agree.
Dial it back. Do not blame this on Joe Biden.
Oh, well, actually, I didn't say Joe Biden, to be completely...
Oh, I didn't say Joe Biden. You said Joe Biden. I never accused him of trying to take out his political opponent with an assassin.
That had made the mistakes, or was there something to it? Was there other types of things that we need to be analyzing or looking at and providing analysis? My point is that when something's so significant, you're talking about something that hasn't happened in decades, right? But my point is this, from a perspective of someone who's actually conducted these are not difficult advances. This is not like I'm putting together a stage placement and a tight shot. This is about looking at your surroundings. What is my green, yellow, and red route, which is your routes out in case? What is my actual elements that I need to be looking at as far as mitigating threats or risks or increased levels? Where's my range fan for the sniper that says, okay, here's my 100, my 200, my sketch. Here's an area where someone could shoot. Because here's my thing.
So you're
Let's
saying,
just say it's a Royce element.
You're saying this is so basic that how big the screw up was, that's what's leading your brain down this road?
That's exactly right, in a way. Because here's the other thing. Let's just say it's a resource.
Tom Emmer was just on with me, and he said very specifically to me, I wrote it down. He said very clearly, it is too early to be talking about who is at fault and who is responsible.
That's why an investigation is necessary.
Yeah, so he's not identifying the who. He's not pointing fingers at anybody. He's not saying the Democrats did it, or Joe Biden did it, or Antifa did it, or the Russians, Pootie Poo, did it, or anything. He's just saying we have to examine the possibilities of the mechanism by which this occurred. Because the easiest answer is that there was an opening to enable this, because you'd have to fail multiple times over, and these people are not in that business. So she doesn't want him to get there. He's not trying to go there.
Is it not dangerous? Is it not reckless to even be throwing around the word intentionally?
So to question things as we do an investigation is recklessness, because at that point, then should we never question anything? My point is this.
I'm not trying to be PC. My point is, in the political environment that we are in.
What would it have taken, right? Let's just say that resources was limited. Let's go with that as a reasoning. So how many times have you seen where they just put a police car inside of a parking lot with not an officer in it and just leave the lights on as a deterrent? Why couldn't that have been a simple thing that was placed in? Why couldn't we have said to the owner of the actual AGR company, hey, look, we don't want to disrupt your business, but we also want to make sure your parking lot is clear of people trying to park in there for the rally. Why don't we place an officer there? My point is that this was too easy of a solution. And when I think about 160
I'm just so uncomfortable with even having
uncomfortable with having to say it.
Yeah.
Trust me, my whole point is that I would like to look at this and say, where was
it's
the mistake
uncomfortable.
made? How can we correct it in the future? Why was this actually done? But I think that this does warrant a J13 type of commission where we can actually look at it and say, let's investigate and find out why this happened so it doesn't happen to anyone. This is not about a political thing. This is about we had an attempt to assassinate a president. We really need to understand what a serious matter this is. And this was a milliseconds or millimeter difference between this being an attempt and this being an assassination.
Yeah, it's a miracle.
I can tell you, at 160 yards, okay, just to give you an idea, your off-the-shelf rifle shoots what they call 1 minute of angle at every 100-yard line. So 100, it's 1 inch, 200, 2 inches, etc. So now you're talking about 1.6-inch grouping capability of a rifle off a manufacturing line. Your average human being, because we used to do this in understanding sniper training, you're 20 inches shoulder to shoulder, 40 inches head to waist, and you're 6x8 in your average head size. These are kind of the dimensions that you look at as an average. You're talking about a 1.6-inch grouping for multiple shots on a basic rifle. We're blessed. I do believe in divine intervention, so I am a person of faith.
Wild.
I can't explain one. I hope that it was a corrugated roof and maybe he slipped off on one of the edges of the corrugated roof or he was rushed, but the whole thing I think just needs to have a better explanation so that the American people and everyone can feel comfortable.
And I think that's why people are saying pump the brakes, because we've seen conspiracy theories, honestly, on the right and the left. I just said Donio Sullivan on that it's already going like wildfire. This is the kind of political environment that they're saying it's too hot and people are jumping to too many conclusions.
Well,
that's why I am so
as a military, remember, one of the things that we do is we what if scenario everything in the world, right? That's
I know, but
I
don't know. I'm just saying,
when
if
I
it's
look at
the what if that you talk about maybe in an investigation and the what if are presenting on live television, I don't know. It's just.
Well, so listen, I'm a public official.
Yes.
Anything that I do, anything that I say in the public. I don't try and hide it in private. I think that the American people need transparency, accountability, and accessibility to the elected officials, not to try and hide behind what we want to look at. And I also think that if the American people know that we're questioning these things as well, it puts them at rest to at least know, why aren't they at least looking into this? We should look at every single situation which is of this significance. We should look at it from multiple angles to ensure that nothing is left out, nothing could be potentially claimed as being covered up. We need to have more transparency to the American people, and I think that's what everyone deserves.
But a full investigation.
Full investigation.
Before anyone points at fault.
That's exactly.
Yes, and in order to do a full investigation, you know what you needed to do is tease out the possibilities. Is it possible that somebody was complicit and coordinating and orchestrating this? Yeah, sure, it's possible. So we do need to investigate that, don't we? And in the process of determining the scope of the investigation, that needs to be on the menu of possibilities. And talking about that is not a conspiracy theory. We're allowed to ask those questions. And by the way, it's because we have historical precedent for it, right? A lot of the times we look back in history, we say, who was really behind that assassin? And a lot of people point their fingers to the CIA. So it is well within our purview to be asking those questions, and we're not alone. Many other people are asking those questions.
And that's why I say I have not made an accusation of something. I just want to make sure we're covering our bases to ensure that we get a proper investigation at all levels to ensure this doesn't happen again and that our president can be safe.
Congressman, thank you for coming in.
All right, so rude awakening for CNN as they start to grapple with the idea that maybe there is some mal-actors in our own government. And so where does it fall? As you can see, Representative Corey Mills is pontificating that maybe it's in this category. Maybe it was intentional. A shooter was allowed to take position and fire. We don't know if it was a directly coordinated attack yet, or if it was just indirect, where they kind of knew something bad would happen and they opened some windows for it, or whether there's a lot more to this story, like a second shooter. And so we're going to talk about that in this next segment.